All right, guys, welcome back to the Church Debater and Preacher Mike. How is Preacher Mike today?
I think I'm looking pretty good for those on the video.
We
And
get most of our listeners through the audio podcast, so don't worry about
so do I need to describe how good I look?
it. All right, this is going to be an interesting topic today. You don't know it yet, but I know the listeners, as they're listening, already know it because they've seen the title already. That's why they're here. It's going to be one of those topics that some people will look at it and say, well, I got to go listen to that. And
Whoa.
then some people will look at it and say, I don't know if I want to listen to that. So it's going to be one of those kind of topics. Okay. I covered this topic in high school class at church this week.
Okay.
And I said, we're going to talk about one of the most polarizing topics in the world right now. I said, do you all know what polarizing means? And one of them said, does it have anything to do with magnets? And I said, well, in a way it does, because a polarizing topic is you have people take one side or the other. There's not a whole lot of in between, just like the poles of a magnet. You're either on one side or the other.
There you go.
So today, as we talk about gun control, we've got to remember that no matter what I read that I've seen on the internet, that what we want to get to is how the scripture can guide us in this topic. And
Sure.
I'll leave that for you.
Sure.
You know, it's funny. I like this. You know, the example I used in high school class, I said, I could do damage, physical damage to you with a baseball bat.
Yep.
I could do physical damage to you, obviously, with a butcher knife. Cain did physical damage to Abel with a stone. I guess that's the first weapon we ever hear of. But that's on, you know, if you had to classify things, you would put those kind of things on the mild end of the spectrum that the country would never outlaw.
Right.
And you would put things like maybe landmines, anthrax, things like that the country would never legalize on the opposite end of the spectrum. It's the things in between that the government has to make a decision on.
There you go.
And I'll tell you at the end what the class, I shouldn't say the class, what the more outspoken students in the class said about the AR-15. Because that's the one that's getting all the press right now. But let me start, Mike, with an article. And I want to do this legally because I'm reading directly from the article. So I want to make sure I give them credit and quote. I looked at something else first. Let me go back to my link real quickly. If you want to sing a song as I'm looking this up, you're free to.
Oh, I think that'd be a good idea, in fact.
Sing a song?
Come up with a good gun song?
Basically, the article was written by a guy that lives in Great Britain.
Okay.
And the article is, the name of it's on the website called thinktheology.co.uk. That's their IRL in Great Britain. His title is How Should Christians Think About Gun Control? And it was written on, his name's Andrew Wilson. It was written on May 5th, 2022. I am not going to read you his opinions. I'm going to read you the facts that he included in his article. So I'm going to read you a couple of things. Last year, there were as many murders in Philadelphia as in the entire country of England, despite the population of England being 30 times in size. Okay, so that's the first one. Here's something that happened in Australia in 1996. 35 people were killed in a mass shooting in Tasmania. The government took robust action, banning all semi-automatic and automatic weapons, imposing longer and stricter waiting periods and more rigorous licensing and storage restrictions, and requiring a genuine reason to own a gun, which includes hunting and target shooting. interestingly enough, did not include self-defense. Since then, the government has brought back 1 million semi-automatic weapons, having the total number of gun owning, I should say, cutting in half the total number of gun owning households in the country. The number of gun homicides has dramatically reduced in that time, and the overall homicide rate has also been cut in half. Obviously, Australia has a different style of government than they do. They would pass something like that. Something like that could be put into law a lot more quickly in Australia than it could here. Having said all that, we know that there was battles, some of which God was on one side more than he was on the other. By the way, as a little aside here, we hear of sword mentioned in the Bible. What did they make swords out of back then?
Oh, they were Genesis 5. There were men already able to work with brass and iron and smelting with ores. Oh, that was already
okay. All right.
time. Yeah.
All right. So I guess what we want to say, we want to stick to the scripture. You're not going to hear mine or Mike's opinion about what this country should do. How do we stick to the scripture when it comes to a topic like this?
Part of sticking to scripture would include this question, Greg, and I think it doesn't need to dominate the discussion, but I think it needs to be asked, and that is, we have to realize, number one, that in our country, guns are legal by the Second Amendment. Now, we can either have a discussion about whether that ought to change, or we have a discussion about how do we keep it and still manage it better.
Okay, let me say one thing insightful that one of our high school, actually it was one of the high school kids, they mentioned, isn't it true, or I guess they asked the question, isn't it true that when the Second Amendment was designed, it was, of course, right after, our independence, our wars, giving people the right to defend themselves if they had to. Wasn't that a lot of the thoughts that were on the minds? And is the Second Amendment supported, but the concept in the Second Amendment be supported from the Bible? And I know that's where you were going anyway, but
yeah, and that's a good question. Obviously the Second Amendment was designed for self-protection. That's what it was.
Right.
Primarily at that time, it probably was from government intrusion, like England, or if their own government decided to come after them, that's what they were afraid of.
Right.
But the concept of protection, self-protection, would still fit today. So there would have to be something, because now I want to go into scripture.
Okay.
And I don't want to begin where you might think, but I want to begin where God would say, and this is in the list of men qualifications to become elders of the Lord's church.
Okay.
And he says that he must be a man who provides for his family. Because if he doesn't, he's worse than an infidel. And now I take that back. I think that was in the discussion of how to treat widows. You have to take care of your own family. The word there for provision, I think, is more than food. And I think it includes safety. So I think that we have a responsibility to take care of our families in every way. We should offer them protection. We should offer them security. We should offer them comfort. We should offer, our families must be provided for, including food, of course. Now, we live in a time that it really does not matter. And I think we would all agree, it really does not matter what laws are passed. There are people going to break them.
Right.
And we can pass all the gun laws that we want to, and there are going to be people who are going to break those rules. And I really do believe, in a political way, it is true that you outlaw all guns and only outlaws will have guns. That's what
Yeah,
I
but
believe.
we've said that since the 30s and 40s. So,
But I
that's,
believe it to be true. I think
yeah.
that I think people are going to get their guns. Now, if there's a way that nobody has guns, we could talk about that. I mean, if that could be done, that might be the best. I don't know. But as far as scripture is concerned, we have an obligation, one, to take care of our families, whatever that means, however that works. I think we have to include in that discussion protection from those who would do us harm. So locks on your doors, security systems, even to the point of concealed carry, if that's what you think is a part of the situation, if it's legal. Number two, we have a responsibility to, as Christians, obey our government. Whether a person is in agreement with it or not, the Second Amendment stands as part of our government. We can have debates about whether it ought to change. We can have debates about how it should change, but we cannot say that it is illegal because it is legal.
Right.
So gun ownership is legal. Therefore, I think as a Christian, I have every right, and any Christian does, to support legal gun ownership because that's the law.
Right. At the same token, and I'm just playing devil's advocate. I'm not
Sure.
taking one side or the other. At the same token, if they do pass laws to outlaw firearms that aren't currently illegal, then just like you were stating from Romans 13 just now, we have to obey the government in that regard too.
That's exactly right. That's 100% right. And the discussion then about gun control is more of a discussion about what we think personally is the type of gun legality that we ought to have in this country, not
Right.
whether or not it's scriptural, because I think it under the government, it is scriptural.
Right.
And
And
so I have a problem with that.
one point we made in class too is our government will never, ever say every weapon you want to buy is legal. And they will never say everything that could possibly be used as a weapon, including a baseball bat, would be illegal. They would never go to those extremes. It's the compromise in the middle that we're dealing with.
You said it exactly right, because the truth is, even if you were to outlaw every potential weapon, the individual's hands are still available to kill people.
Right.
And it happens by choking. It happens by all kinds of things, judo lessons, karate. So you can't, it is impossible. Not only is it, we're not even talking about what's a good idea or not. It is impossible to outlaw things that might hurt or kill people. You can't do that. It won't happen. Now, what should our attitude be about guns in particular? Well, as a Christian, I think part of what our attitude is, number one, we have the right, and some people really like guns. I have never, except one time when I was young, little, shot my grandfather's shotgun, about blew my shoulder off, just pow, But about a year ago, I shot an AR at a shooting range. And I have to say, it was fun. I enjoyed it. And apparently I hit every target, and I couldn't believe it. And you can tell because it made a ting, I enjoyed it. I cannot deny that. I enjoyed it. There are a lot of things about gun ownership that people enjoy. They like the fact of buying a gun that is maybe old, that is an antique. They like it because it's a hand-me-down through families.
The students in the class wrote down what they thought were the 3 reasons to own a gun. One is hunting, one is protection, and the other one is like not memorabilia, but more vintage collections, that kind of thing. That's what you're talking about.
That's exactly right. So I don't have any problem with that. there are people who are opposed, obviously, to us killing and eating animals. There are people that don't think that's the right thing to do. Well, okay, that's fine, but I believe that's perfectly fine. And so having a gun to do that and go hunting, I've never been hunting in a day in my life and don't plan to. But I don't know that it in the scale of things, hunting might be a little more dramatic, but fishing is the same thing. You know,
They didn't have grocery stores in the Old Testament, did they?
They did not. They had to go get their own stuff. There you go. So those are the attitudes that I think. I think the two main things that aren't concerned, every Christian should ask, not just about gun control, but about anything. Number one, what does God say about it as far as our relationship to the government? Well, we must obey the government in ways that do not violate God's laws. Therefore, number two, does a gun violate the law of God? I don't know any way to say that it does. I can't figure out how to go into scripture and determine that a gun by itself is a violation of scripture. Then number three, Christians should ask, okay, the government allows it. It's not, the gun itself is not outlawed by scripture. Now I have to take care of my family. Will I buy a gun to protect my family if needed? That's where the Christian goes. And I think that's a legal and scriptural position to take.
Okay. Do you think, given that article I read about Australia, let's just take the AR-15 since it's gotten so much publicity? That's what will happen in Uvalde. The gentleman that killed his back doctor, he had bought an AR-15 that afternoon. One of the things that Australia did was make it more difficult, have a legitimate reason. Maybe they couldn't get it quite so quickly. I will tell you that I got the general feel from the high school class that I taught that they thought it should be much more difficult, if not illegal, to buy one of those, because who really needs a semi-automatic weapon, which is basically, it reloads itself. You have to pump. It's not automatic. An automatic, you could just hold down the trigger and it fires away.
Right.
Semi-automatic, you have to keep punching the trigger, but it automatically reloads. At one time, believe it or not, I'm not even going to say that in case I have my facts wrong. So on the AR-15, I got the opinion you don't really need it to hunt. We were trying to think. I looked up, what do you hunt with an AR-15? And usually it's the things that came up were like feral pigs and maybe coyotes, but the general public would not have a reason to really own one of those guns. That was the gist I was getting from them. So scripturally, have we taken it too far? Do we allow, is it too easy to get weapons now? And is that really what the Second Amendment implied? There's a lot of things that are in the Bill of Rights that we manipulate, to me, differently than what our founding fathers intended. Freedom of the press is one, I think,
Sure.
that gets manipulated all the time.
Sure.
Back before we had the ability to make all these weapons, what was the scripture saying, and does it apply to these sophisticated weapons that we have now?
Well, I think that there are some interesting things. You know, when Jesus was going to the garden prior to his crucifixion, he asked if any of them had a sword to have it ready. And Peter said, we have two.
He had his ready. Peter had his ready.
And he had it ready, and he was ready to use it. Now, why would Jesus ask if you have a sword, but then when they use it, tell them put it away?
Plus, he probably knew they had a sword.
Well, I would think, you know, but I think there's a point here. What about when the soldiers ask you know, what should we do as Christians? What should we do? Jesus said, be content with your wages and do your job. Well, that's carrying a weapon. We should have discussions that involve, did God ever say at any time anything related to weapons are not a good thing to have? The only time that I know of was when he sent out the 70 on the limited commission, I believe in Matthew chapter 10, and he told them not to take provisions. Depend upon the people to whom you are going in this limited way. And one of them was, don't take a sword. But he also said, don't take a change of clothes, don't take a money bag. He was teaching them that you need to depend upon those people, because that's how you're going to determine who is worthy of hearing you. If they don't take care of you, wipe the dust off your feet and go. After that, it seems it would be perfectly fine, because I know they carried around a money bag. It appears they had changes of clothes. And I think based on that situation, Peter had a sword with him all the time. Why? I think probably it has to do with the presence of evil. I cannot believe that God would ever say to us, let evil kill you every time, and it's okay. I just don't believe that. Now, there's a difference between the threat of harm or death as it relates to your faith versus the threat of harm or death as it relates just to living your life.
Right.
So if there's a decision to be made, either deny Christianity or I'm going to kill you. Well, you don't have the right with God to deny Jesus. So you take it. That's what the martyrs have always done. And they never rose up with a sword and a gun to fight martyrdom for their faith. But the difference would be, if I'm providing for my family and my family is attacked, do I not have the right to defend them? There's nothing related to the faith of Christianity. It's just about providing for my family.
Right.
And so I think that in that case, I think God would expect me to take care of my family. He would expect me to protect them and see to it that they have security. So I think that's a part of the discussion. Now, the discussion that's going to happen and has continued to happen is not really a scriptural discussion, because once we have decided that we follow the government, they made a law that seems not to be denied by scripture. Now we can have the discussion a political way. Well, how far is too far? How much is too much? Well, those kinds of things can be rather subjective. For instance, your statement about the guy read about Europe. I would be interested to know, is Europe more urban or agrarian, farm or not? Because it doesn't surprise me in places like Philadelphia, where everybody's stacked upon one another, that there would be more crime than there would in the outlying areas. And there is, that's a fact.
Right.
If you live in a farm area, the number of crimes, including murder, is small. Well, if all of the European area that he's talking about is related more to the farming community than the urban community, then it would make sense to me that Philadelphia would have more of that, I would think. So I don't think there's a clear answer. I happen to agree that there's a way to own guns without going so crazy, that to have the latest and high tech and all this kind of stuff. You don't need that for hunting, even though it's fun to shoot. We would all agree, as you said earlier, I don't think the government would allow me to buy a tank. I just don't think they would.
Or own a landmine.
Or a landmine.
Yeah.
Or have anthrax. You're 100% right. Because even if it would be fun to shoot off a landmine somewhere just to see it happen, there's some common sense that goes into this that
Right.
people need to have in mind. And that's a discussion for another thing. But as far as the concept of gun ownership as it relates to personal security, I don't see scripture opposing it at all.
Right, right. And regardless of where our government goes, Romans 13 tells us to obey the governing authorities. And back then Rome was a pretty corrupt government, and yet Paul was still saying that.
Yes. You know, is it possible even, and maybe this is a crazy statement, but is it fair to say that, as it has happened in recent times, outlawing guns has created a situation where people can't protect themselves? Had they had certain things, they might have been able to stop the attack. Is that a fair?
Possibly. I mean, that he didn't mention anything in there about his story about Australia, how much their homicides had gone down since they so he didn't mention that. I got one little thing trivia wise that just popped into my head. Obviously we are more advanced in weaponry. It's weaponry, isn't it?
Weaponry.
Than they were in the Old Testament.
Yes.
But my question is, you mentioned they were already using bronze in Genesis 5.
Yes.
By the time that we got to the latest chronological book that we have in our New Testament, had weapons advanced very much? What was the most advanced weapon that they had by then?
No, it seems like sword.
Okay.
Or catapult, maybe.
Okay.
You know, those old movies like the 300 and those kind of attack kind of things. What do you see? You see catapult, you see sword, bow and arrow. I don't think you see any advancement of weaponry like that until what? Relatively recently?
Right, relatively recently for sure. Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, we'll let our scholars work on that, guys.
Yeah,
let us know. We'll include it on next week's episode.
Yeah, because we'll deal with the Bible stuff. Y'all deal with the other stuff.
As always, Mike, we've solved another issue today.
We are so good. We are just so good. That's all there is to it.
All right. I know that sounded like a profound thought, but closes out with a profound thought.
Okay. I think I can do that.
All right.
In the midst of all of this stuff that we've been talking about and all the trouble, we can concentrate so much on what is happening in a bad way that sometimes we lose sight that really those bad things are still in the minority. True. There are so many good things happening, so many good people working. I mean, all you have to do is look at what happens when tornadoes go through a place.
Right.
Like Mayfield. They had literally millions of dollars and multiple millions of dollars of supplies sent in there by good people to help. And anytime there's something like that going on, we are reminded that basically speaking, we are good people. People are good. It's that small percentage, I don't know, 5% that are so taken over by themselves and sin that they actually cause harm and death to other people.
Right.
Mostly people are good. And I don't want us to be so tainted by those bad things that happen that we become so discouraged when in fact people are good. And let's really make sure we don't forget that.
You know, you made me think of something. Our first place that we lived in, St. Louis, we picked it quickly and it wasn't the best place in the world. And there were some bad people that would, you know, back then people would steal hubcaps and maybe just take the tire completely off a car. But yet, when we were out there, we had this mammoth 24-inch snowstorm. And all of a sudden, even those people that were doing the bad things all of a sudden everybody is helping each other out, digging
that's good.
out, getting food for other people. And even the people that you might put in that bad category, they've got a good side every now and then.
Yeah.
If we know if we don't work together, we're not going to get through this. So
Yeah.
I agree with you.
All
All right, guys. All right, that's it for us this week on the Church Debater and Preacher Mike.
Yep.
Say goodbye, Mike.
Goodbye, Mike.